Russia believed the next phase of the war would begin near Kiev. Instead, it started collapsing inside Kupiansk. By May 2026, Russian troops moving through the city were disappearing faster than commanders could explain. Supply routes were dying under FPV drone attacks. Underground positions were being exposed through thermal surveillance. Entire assault groups vanished after only minutes of movement near the Oskil River. Burned armored vehicles began appearing along tree lines and shattered intersections faster than Russian recovery crews could remove them. But the most dangerous part was happening far beyond the battlefield itself. Because every extra day Russia spent trying to hold Kupiansk was quietly damaging something much larger. A northern offensive the Kremlin had spent months preparing. And before the first major assault force could even move toward Kiev, the timetable behind the operation was already beginning to break apart. By early May 2026, the Kremlin believed the battlefield was finally turning in Russia's favor. Russian planners were no longer focused only on holding territory in eastern Ukraine. They were thinking about Kiev. But not through another chaotic invasion like 2022. This time the plan was narrower, faster, more calculated. Inside Russian operational maps, the forests and road corridors near Chernihiv became the center of the entire strategy. Military convoys quietly moved across western Russia and Belarus under heavy secrecy. Engineering units prepared portable bridge systems for armored crossings. Railway logistics teams stockpiled fuel, ammunition, and spare parts near the northern staging areas. The operation depended on speed. Nearly 100,000 troops were being assembled for the offensive. Mechanized brigades, mobile electronic warfare groups, reserve armored units supported by T-90M tanks. Russian commanders believed that if the northern thrust gained momentum during the first week, pressure on Kiev could begin in less than 10 days. But the plan contained one dangerous weakness. The Eastern Front had to remain stable long enough for elite combat formations to rotate north. And inside Kupiansk, Ukraine was already preparing the exact kind of battlefield designed to disrupt the entire operational rhythm behind the offensive. Ukraine understood something Russian planners did not. Kupiansk was no longer just a city on the Eastern Front. It was becoming the clock that would decide the northern offensive. Instead of launching reckless frontal assaults, Ukrainian commanders began slowly reshaping the battlefield around the city. FPV drone crews tracked Russian movement patterns for weeks. Reconnaissance teams studied supply routes, basement access points, and radio transmission habits. Artillery crews quietly registered escape corridors before the main operation even began. Everything was being prepared in advance. The Kardia Brigade became the primary assault force inside Kupiansk. Units attached to the 10th Army Corps moved closer to the Oskil crossings, waiting to seal off Russian withdrawal routes at the critical moment. Meanwhile, the Achilles FP5 unit focused on something far more dangerous than tanks. Logistics, fuel carriers, ammunition runners, portable generators, radio relays hidden inside damaged buildings. Russian troops inside central Kupiansk slowly began losing the systems keeping them alive. Many Russian positions were still intact physically, but operationally, they were already dying. Some resupply groups reportedly lost nearly 70% of their deliveries before reaching the city center. Ukrainian FPV teams were sometimes striking targets less than 80 seconds after thermal detection. Positions exposing radio emissions often survived only a few hours before artillery or drones arrived. Ukraine was not simply attacking Russian forces inside Kupiansk, it was suffocating the entire battlefield around them. By the third week of May, organized Russian resistance inside central Kupiansk had collapsed almost everywhere. Almost. One final stronghold remained near the city center, the Central District Hospital. A heavy Soviet-era structure built with thick concrete walls, underground maintenance corridors, and reinforced basement storage sections. After losing most of the surrounding blocks, surviving Russian troops pulled back into the building and turned it into a fortress. Roughly 30 soldiers were believed to be trapped inside. The position still mattered. As long as the hospital remained active, Russian commanders could continue claiming they maintained a foothold inside the city. Ukraine understood the political importance immediately, but instead of leveling the structure with indiscriminate artillery fire, Ukrainian forces prepared a slower operation. Reconnaissance drones circled the hospital sector for nearly 16 continuous hours. Thermal scans identified generator rooms, underground movement, and ventilation shafts hidden beneath collapsed debris. Then the strike package began. Precision munitions hit the upper access points first. FPV drones followed seconds later, diving through shattered corridors and broken stairwells toward the basement network below. One drone reportedly entered through a damaged second-floor window before disappearing underground. 15 minutes later, Russian thermal signatures inside the hospital sector vanished completely. The battle for Kupiansk was no longer about holding territory. It had become a psychological collapse unfolding room by room beneath drone cameras. After losing the city center, Russian forces stopped trying to enter Kupiansk with armored columns. The losses had become too severe. Instead, the Kremlin shifted toward infiltration warfare. Tiny assault groups, 1 or 2 soldiers at a time, no headlights, no radio chatter unless absolutely necessary. Movement through forests, drainage ditches, abandoned rail sectors, and industrial pipelines beneath the Oskil River. Russian planners believed smaller signatures could slip through Ukraine's growing drone network. They were wrong. Ukrainian FPV teams had already adapted to the new pattern. Thermal ambush zones appeared near pipe exits, riverbanks, and collapsed infrastructure corridors. Drone crews monitored movement routes for hours without speaking. Mortar teams waited behind them with pre-calculated firing coordinates. Sometimes the killing happened in seconds. Several Russian infiltrators were reportedly detected while hiding inside steel pipelines because the metal trapped residual body heat differently than the surrounding ground. Once identified, FPV drones moved immediately. FPV drones cheaper than a rifle scope were now collapsing infiltration operations that had taken Russian units weeks to organize. By late May, entire sections of terrain around Kupiansk had effectively become drone-controlled territory. The most dangerous realization for Russian commanders was becoming impossible to ignore. There were no safe gaps left anymore. While Russian infiltration groups were still dying around Kupiansk, Ukrainian intelligence began uncovering something far larger behind the battlefield. The city had never been the final objective. Intercepted logistics traffic, railway transfers, and encrypted command activity pointed toward a much bigger operation forming near Belarus. Russian planners were assembling nearly 100,000 personnel for a northern offensive aimed at pressuring Kiev through the Chernihiv corridor. But by then, the offensive schedule was already starting to slip out of alignment. The Kremlin had expected the Eastern Front to stabilize quickly enough for experienced formations to rotate north. Instead, Kupiansk was consuming exactly the forces Moscow needed for the offensive. Elite units from the 1st Guards Tank Army and the 6th Combined Arms Army were suffering heavy losses under constant FP5 and artillery pressure near the Oskil crossings. Entire logistics routes had become death corridors. Some Russian armored groups reportedly survived less than 7 kilometers after entering Ukrainian drone observation zones. Fuel trucks burned along narrow approach roads while damaged T-90M crews struggled to evacuate vehicles under continuous aerial surveillance. Ukrainian analysts later estimated Russia lost more than 260 armored vehicles during the wider Kupiansk fighting. But the real damage was time. Russian planners were beginning to face a problem emergency reinforcements could no longer solve quickly enough. Every additional week spent fighting for Kupiansk weakened the northern buildup Moscow had spent months preparing. Experienced crews disappeared faster than replacements could arrive. And slowly, the Kremlin's 100,000-man offensive toward Kiev began losing momentum before it had even started. By the end of May, Ukraine understood something critical. Kupiansk had bought time, and Kiev immediately began spending that time preparing the north for a battle Russia might no longer be capable of winning quickly. Battle-hardened units pulled from Kupiansk started rotating toward the Chernihiv direction. FP5 crews with months of urban combat experience were reassigned north alongside mechanized brigades attached to the 10th Army Corps. Many of these soldiers had spent weeks fighting under constant drone pressure around the Oskil River. They already understood how Russian assault patterns worked. Now they were preparing for something much larger. Across the northern frontier, Ukraine accelerated construction of a layered defensive system stretching nearly 360 kilometers. Concrete bunkers appeared behind forest lines and elevated road sectors. Anti-tank trenches cut across likely armored approach routes. Underground ammunition depots and hidden FPV launch shelters were buried beneath camouflage nets and reinforced soil. The scale was enormous. From above, parts of the northern frontier no longer looked like temporary battlefield defenses. They looked like the early construction phases of a permanent war zone protecting the road to Kiev. More than 2,800 hardened defensive positions were reportedly completed or expanded during the buildup. Some anti-vehicle trench sectors reached nearly 6 meters deep. Drone relay towers extended surveillance coverage almost 100 kilometers behind the border. But the most dangerous part was not the concrete. It was the integration. Drones, artillery, electronic warfare, thermal reconnaissance, minefields, mobile strike teams. Every layer was designed to slow Russian momentum long enough for the next layer to begin killing it. And the farther Russia advanced toward Kiev, the more dangerous the battlefield was becoming. In the end, the battle for Kupiansk was never only about one city. It was about timing. The Kremlin needed speed for the northern offensive to work. Fast breakthroughs, rapid force concentration, immediate pressure on Kiev before Ukraine could fully reorganize the northern front. Kupiansk shattered the operational tempo the Kremlin needed for the northern offensive to succeed. Russia planned momentum. Ukraine forced attrition. Russia planned surprise. Ukraine forced delay. Russia planned to shift experienced assault units north. Instead, those units were consumed street by street around the Oskil River under constant FP5 surveillance. By the time Russian planners fully understood the scale of the losses, the battlefield had already changed. Northern Ukraine was no longer exposed terrain like it had been in 2022. It had become a layered defensive network built around drones, trenches, electronic warfare, and hardened fortifications. And every extra week lost in Kupiansk gave Ukraine more time to strengthen it. The most dangerous weapon Ukraine used in this battle was not artillery, not FPV drones, not even the trenches north of Kiev. It was time itself. The road to Kiev still exists on Russian military maps. But after Kupiansk, the battlefield surrounding that road no longer looks the same. Every week lost in the east gave Ukraine more drones, more trenches, more fortified positions, more time to prepare for the next assault. The Kremlin wanted speed. Instead, it inherited delay. And in modern warfare, delay can become fatal. Because long before offensives collapse on the battlefield, they usually collapse inside the operational rhythm, holding them together. So what do you think? Can the Kremlin still risk another northern offensive after what happened in Kupiansk? Or has the battlefield around Kiev already changed too much for speed-based warfare to work anymore? Share your thoughts in the comments below.